I just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death. I hope that's helpful.
There is a body count. This is not some theoretical pie in the sky thing. People have died from a disease. How many people? This should not be a difficult thing to determine, but it is, because of course that stat continues to change, or the metric by which that stat is calculated continues to change, because it is a calculation. It is an estimation. It is something that is written down on a death certificate by a doctor working on certain guidelines. So here's a prime example of that. You may have seen this very scaremongering headline in recent days. This one, let's take it from The Guardian. It was in the New York Post and elsewhere, but on The Guardian has New York City coronavirus death toll jumps past 10,000 in revised count. Revised count? What does that mean? So as this story goes on to say, New York City has revised its COVID-19 death toll sharply upwards to more than 10,000 people, hitting an important psychological milestone. We're in the 5 digits now, people. And it happened overnight, just like that, because they changed the criteria. With the city now firmly established as being at the heart of the global coronavirus crisis, and it jumped into that top position because of this change. The soaring death toll has been fueled by the adding of 3,778 people who were not tested for COVID-19, but are presumed to have died from it. All right, well, there you go. So this is the criteria that we're using. Well, they probably had it, so let's just add them. And now it's 10,000. Well, there you go. So as you can see, we cannot take these numbers at face value. They are judgment calls.
Can you talk about your concerns about deaths being misreported by coronavirus because of either lack of testing or standards for how they're characterized?
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. And I think the reporting here has been pretty straightforward over the last 5 to 6 weeks. Prior to that, when there wasn't testing in January and February, that's a very different situation and unknown. There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
Let's underline this point for the heart of thinking. That number that's being flashed on your TV screens and on the front pages of newspapers and on websites every single day that is being flashed in front of you, the number of deaths, the number of bodies that's being piled up, is a padded number. It is being generously added to by a generous classification that anyone dying with COVID-19 is dying of COVID-19, not a trivial distinction, and not some fancy flight of conspiracy theorizing. It is being admitted to by the officials in charge of doing this themselves. Professor Walter Ricciardi, advisor to Italy's health minister, explained this, the Italian incredible number of deaths being reported, was caused by the generous way the Italian government handles death certificates. The way in which we code deaths in our country is very generous in the sense that all people who die in hospitals with the coronavirus are deemed to be dying of the coronavirus. They go on to talk about Germany. On March 20th, the president of Germany's Robert Koch Institute confirmed that Germany counts any deceased person who was infected with coronavirus as a COVID-19 death, whether or not it actually caused death. I Ireland, Northern Ireland's HSC Public Health Agency is releasing weekly surveillance bulletins on the pandemic. In those reports, they define a COVID death as individuals who have died within 28 days of first positive result, whether or not COVID-19 was the cause of death. They're openly admitting it. And one of the craziest actually comes out of England, where this article notes, NHS England's Office of National Statistics releases weekly reports on nationwide mortality. Its latest report, at the time of this article, week 12, March 14th to 20th, was released on March 31st and made special mention of COVID-19, explaining they were going to change the way they report the numbers in future. The ONS system is predicated on the registration of deaths, meaning they count not the number of people who die every week, but the number of deaths registered per week. This, naturally, leads to slight delays in the recording of numbers, as the registration process can take a few days. However, with coronavirus deaths, since it's a national emergency, they are now including provisional figures, which will be included in the dataset in subsequent weeks. This leaves them wide open to, either accidentally or deliberately, reporting the same deaths twice, once provisionally and then once officially a week later.
What's the best way to convince a parent to get a vaccine is to have an outbreak. Fear sells. Sadly, people are compelled much more by fear than reason.
The lockdown is happening in your mind. The lockdown happens because there is mass compliance with it, because people believe these numbers unquestioningly, these numbers that are clearly and admittedly being fudged and manipulated and finessed and generously coded and all of the other words that they use to describe the cooking of the books that's going on right now, because people believe in that narrative that is being forced on us on the back of those manipulated numbers. They will self-quarantine and self-isolate and do all of the things, do anything that the government says. Oh, I needed an immunity passport now? Okay. Oh, I need we need to get special QR code apps and that'll trace us and give us green or red scores. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I guess that's going to happen now. Oh, mandatory vaccinations? Well, look how many people are dying. I guess we have to do this.